Breaking just moments ago, after 2 weeks of negotiation, California Governor Jerry Brown says he will mobilize 400 National Guard troops within the state and along the border. Brown is doing a bit of an about-face here. He has previously been reluctant to get troops to the border over concerns that it would be too closely tied to immigration enforcement. He reiterates that his condition from last week that they will not enforce immigration laws or participate in the construction of any new border barrier, a.k.a. the wall. And this for you tonight, President George H.W. Bush has released a statement a short time ago about the passing of his wife of 73 years, First Lady Barbara Bush. He said, quote, "I always knew Barbara was the most beloved woman in the world. The outpouring of love and friendship being directed at the enforcer is lifting us all up. We have faith she is in heaven, and we know life will go on as she would have it. So cross the Bushes off your worry list," he writes. Their love story began at a dance when she was 16, and it was captured in a collection of letters that George wrote to his wife. One of them reading, quote, "You have given me joy that few men know. I have climbed perhaps the highest mountain in the world, but even that cannot hold a candle to being Barbara's husband." Tonight's quote of the night comes from Barbara Bush herself.
You will never regret not having passed one more test, winning one more verdict, or not closing one more deal. You will regret time not spent with a husband, a child, a friend, or a parent.
Well said from Barbara Bush herself at a commencement address at Wellesley. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. That's our story for this evening. Tucker Carlson's begins now in Washington.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. I'm Mark Stein in for Tucker Tonight. Illegal immigration is turning into a crisis across the country. And it's not because we lack laws, but because those laws are being ignored. According to new statistics from the Department of Homeland Security, dozens of gang members, including members of MS-13, are prowling the streets because sanctuary policies let them go free. 2/3 of the released gang members were in California. Apparently that state's only problem with illegal immigrant criminals, it seems, is that they don't have the right to vote yet. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, an illegal immigrant working as an Uber driver raped a passenger and has now fled back to Ghana. And in Washington, President Trump's Supreme Court pick, Neil Gorsuch, just sided with the court's liberals to strike down a law ordering the deportation of immigrants who commit violent crimes. Raul Reyes is an attorney and immigration advocate, and he joins us. This rape victim, she's made her name public, right. Emily Murray, because she now basically has no redress from the courts.
Right, unfortunately.
What's the deal with that? Who's to blame?
Well, you know, when we look at the facts in this particular case, it is really, honestly, a big mess all around. First question, why was Uber even employing this undocumented person?
Well, the answer is
number one. So
they employ a lot of illegal aliens.
Well, that in itself, even I know Uber employees are considered contractors, but still, anytime we all know, anytime you get a job in this country, you're supposed to fill out your documentation. So that's the first problem. Second problem is when they set the Massachusetts, when they set the bail for this case, for a rape case, they only set it for $10,000. That is, anyone in the legal field will tell you that's unbelievably low, especially for national. It should have been at least $100,000.
But it's large for Massachusetts, because only last year a Massachusetts judge gave bail of $2,500 to a Dominican gangbanger who'd raped a Boston College student, and he then fled.
Right. So
this is becoming a pattern.
So they cannot say they were totally unaware of these type of circumstances, especially with foreign nationals. And the third problem goes to the whole question of detainers. In this case, there's been some he said about who sent the detainer and who did not follow up on it. But this is the bottom line of the problem, is that, remember, an immigration detainer, by definition of the statute, is a voluntary request. It's asking the police to, or whoever is the local law officials involved, to hold this person for ICE. In Massachusetts, because it's the sanctuary jurisdiction, they did not do that. But you know what? Even if Massachusetts were not a sanctuary jurisdiction, that's a problem, because ICE detainers are voluntary. If ICE really wants to get someone, if they want to take someone off the streets and they think they have reason to do so, they need to get a criminal warrant, which requires a finding of probable cause.
But in this case, in other words, you need probable cause for someone who is for a warrant for someone who's not even in the country. But just let's not let these Massachusetts authorities off the hook that easily. This detainer was sent to the local police, who then sent it to the district court, and the district court basically declined to pass it on to the county attorney. Isn't this the culture in Massachusetts of a sanctuary state, where in effect this guy, like the guy last year, we're getting to this where illegal immigrant Uber drivers who commit rape, they're not quite a separate category of crime, but they're getting that way. Just like the guy last year, they're treated differently from, say, a Massachusetts native, some guy who got off the boat at Plymouth Rock would if he
and
committed
it's not necessarily the culture in Massachusetts. What it is, it's the state law, because in 2015, the Massachusetts Supreme Court, they ruled that statewide, no matter what local police or law enforcement officials believe or think, statewide, that these local jurisdictions cannot hold people while awaiting ICE detainers, because they were concerned about potential Fourth Amendment concerns. So even, for example, even if there wasn't this back and forth, even if the local officials had wanted to, that would have broken the law.
How does the Fourth Amendment apply to someone who shouldn't even be in the country that has the Fourth Amendment?
Well, the way that the Massachusetts court applied it, they were looking at, they defined detention as an arrest, and the arrest ends when the local jurisdiction releases them. And under their view, this is their thinking, if you hold them again for another 48 hours, which is what detainers do, that constitutes a second arrest, and therefore that's where you have the Fourth Amendment concerns about unreasonable searches and seizures. But that's their reasoning.
So their reasoning is that there's 7 billion people on the planet, and if this guy who's back in Ghana has a pal who'd like to come to Massachusetts and rape a woman, that pal in Ghana knows he's covered by the Fourth Amendment, even though he's in a country that doesn't have the Fourth Amendment.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I would say what I think it's important to know about detainers, what I think everyone should know, whether you're in favor of sanctuary cities and jurisdictions or not. ICE issues about 100,000 detainers a year, okay? Of that number, in 2015, which is the year where we have the fullest statistics, only 61% were not followed up on in any way. There was no call to the local jail. They didn't show up. Nobody, arrived to pick them up. Only 15%, and that's 1/5, actually resulted in a deportation. So that goes back to the notion that if ICE were serious about getting these people, and Homeland Security were taking it seriously, they would get the criminal warrant, because then the local jurisdictions, there's no belief system, there's no Massachusetts court decision. It's the law that they must hold them.
Well, thank you for explaining that the detainer is in effect just meaningless bureaucratic mumbo jumbo.
It's a request.
Well,
it's just a request.
Yeah, that's right. Request. Voluntary. Great. If you think it's bad here, you should see what's going on in European countries that Americans think of as super peaceful. A new story in Politico says that grenade attacks have become a part of daily life in Sweden. Rape and sexual harassment are surging. Hundreds of residents tramped off to join ISIS. And last year in Stockholm, a Muslim extremist murdered 5 people by ploughing his stolen truck into the city's iconic department store. Katie Hopkins is a columnist with Rebel Media. Great to have you with us, Katie. Sweden is in a hell of a state. Basically, people's perception of Sweden is about 40 years out of date now.
That's so true. You know, people still imagine Sweden as this idyllic place, lots of mountains, snow-topped mountains, you know, everybody's skipping down the street with their pigtails. I was there quite recently, and I found it to be a very hostile place indeed. I went to walk the no-go zones. There's about 62 no-go zones now in Sweden, where the police fear to go, where the ambulances can't respond to emergencies, and where fire engines have to be taken by police because the fire engines are attacked. So really the gangs are establishing themselves, they're keeping the police out, and hand grenades, which you can buy for as little as $30, are being used as a kind of warning device for each gang to keep those people out.
Now, you mentioned those no-go zones. Every time we mention these on Fox, the governments in Europe indignantly deny they exist. So we should say they're unofficial no-go zones. I went to one of them in Rosengard, where the sort of lone police station is like an armed fortress. You can dial, nobody's home. If you ever had to actually go to the police for anything, you can't get in the building. Sweden has undergone it was basically an ethnically homogenous society in which Swedes are predicted to become a minority in their own country by 2050. That's an extraordinary demographic transformation.
They took, there's a population of about 10 million Swedes, and they are, irritatingly enough, Swedish people are exceptionally good looking, and that really annoys me. But anyway, they took this very perfect population and they brought in 170,000 migrants, and those migrants were from countries that we know about. We know the sorts of things that goes on in those countries, and then we wonder, why is it that Sweden has turned into a place where Swedes themselves are desperate to leave? I hear stories all the time of Swedes that want to get out of Sweden because it's too violent. Norway says it doesn't want to become Sweden. And what really bugs me is the media will not be honest about it. They talk about these individuals, these migrants, they talk about them as the new Swedes. Well, guess what? You can't take Mohammed, stick a blonde wig on him and put a name badge that says Ulf and turn him into a Swede. It doesn't work like that.
No, it's interesting, and it's particularly hard on the women. I mean, I talked to a young lady in Östersund and some girls who'd been sexually assaulted at a pop concert. There's an incredible level of sexual assault going on now in a country that we think of, as I said, as still being far more peaceful than the United States or the UK or most other countries.
Yes, and we should stop thinking that way. That's naive to think that way. We've imported half the Middle East to Sweden, and as a result, the men there particularly are behaving like men in the Middle East. 43% of rapes that happen to children in that country, and it has the second highest rape of any country in Europe. And the great news from all of this, if we look for a positive, is that in September they will have elections, and in September the Liberals will be forced out, and actually the Conservatives and the Swedish UKIP will be in.
We have to leave it there, Katie. Thanks for coming on. 11 Republicans in the House of Representatives have sent a letter to the Justice Department calling for the criminal investigations of, wait for it, James Comey, Hillary Clinton, Andrew McCabe and Loretta Lynch. Fox's chief national correspondent Ed Henry has more on that. Ed.
Mark, good to see you. The behind-the-scenes story I'm getting is Attorney General Jeff Sessions still does not appear to be moving quick enough on alleged abuses by the FBI and Justice Department for the liking of top advisors to President Trump. So they've been prodding Republicans on Capitol Hill to jump in. So Congressman Ron DeSantis and 10 other House Republicans have now taken the initiative to send this criminal referral to the FBI Director Chris Wray, to Sessions, and to U.S. Attorney John Huber. Remember, he was tasked by the Attorney General to evaluate whether there needs to be criminal charges for actions like abuse of FISA by Obama officials to spy on the Trump campaign. At the top of their list for potential charges, as you mentioned, Hillary Clinton for using Fusion GPS to disguise payments from her presidential campaign for that anti-Trump dossier, a link not disclosed when top officials got that FISA warrant to spy on former Trump advisor Carter Page. A Clinton aide tells Fox there's no merit to this claim, and Republicans must be acting up here because they're scared about the upcoming midterms. That's their view. The criminal referral also targets FBI officials like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Remember, their anti-Trump text messages seem to reveal a bias that helped contribute to the agency's bungling of that probe into Clinton's server. Former FBI Chief James Comey also targeted for signing 3 FISA applications without disclosing the funding from the Clinton camp and the DNC for that dossier, as well as the fact he drafted an exoneration statement months before Clinton's FBI interview. That appears to contradict sworn testimony to Congress, where Comey said he only made the decision to not charge her after she was questioned by the FBI. Comey and his former number 2 at the FBI, Andrew McCabe, also cited for leaks to the media, including charges that classified info got out from the release of those memos that Comey put together. Today, he insisted he did nothing wrong and is confident he will be exonerated. But here's where it gets really interesting. After Comey told The View he believes McCabe is a good person, but the Justice Department Inspector General found that he lied about his leaking, McCabe fired back it's not true and that Comey is simply not being honest. So you've got the former G-men now turning on each other, McCabe and Comey. There's going to be, again, a lot more interesting soon, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ed. I'll believe it when I see it. It may be quicker for Donald Trump to launch a new reality show, Celebrity Chain Gang. I would love to see those guys on it. The Comey Circus, speaking of James Comey, is still on tour and cashing in, and the former FBI director is hitting up The View and the late-night television shows. Wait until you see the bizarre standing ovation he got. That's coming up next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. James Comey's epic cry for attention is taking him on a grand tour of the TV world, but he's getting a mixed reception. Last night on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the former FBI director was treated like a visiting monarch.
To the truth.
Yes, to the truth. Why would you fire the FBI director who's leading the Russia investigation?
Because you're leading the Russia investigation.
He's tweeted at me probably 50 times. I've been gone for a year. I'm like a breakup he can't get over. He wakes up in the morning.
I think somebody wrote that line for him, actually. Not everybody was so kind. This morning, Comey was hit hard by today's Savannah Guthrie and The View's Meghan McCain.
It feels like you might have some scores to settle, you know, that you might have a little bit of anger left over and a little bit of bitterness.
What do you say to people like him and people like me that think you're just doing this for money and attention? I think that maybe J. Edgar Hoover is rolling over in his grave at saying the types of things you're saying and revealing the types of things you're revealing.
Well, we'll try to confirm that from the rolling J. Edgar. And who better to do that than the great Brian Kilmeade, host of Fox and Friends and of The Brian Kilmeade Show on Fox News Radio, 9 a.m. Eastern every morning. Good to have you with us. Brian, what do you make of Comey's tour?
Mark, I just saw you 10 hours ago. You had no necktie, I don't believe. We were on the couch on Fox and Friends, but now we're in Comey watch.
Oh, wait, yeah, you're, what is this? Like, Comey doesn't wear a tie and suddenly he's cool, and now you've taken your tie off. Clear off and put a necktie on. What's up with...
I don't know how to tie the knot.
He's gone for the dark shirt, so that's like a, what is that? Like
Yes.
a Regis Philbin, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire type thing? I don't even know. Wait, how long can James Comey, a basically fired federal bureaucrat, ride this thing out?
Well, it's just fascinating because if you think about, I read the book, I was able to get it over the weekend, I closed the book and I thought to myself, I have to read it because I need to know all these storylines. Yeah. But if I'm going to get a book that's going to inform and entertain, I wouldn't look for this. For example, when Corey Lewandowski writes a book with Dave Bossie, it's for Trump fans, inside the Trump world. Fine. When you have Michael Wolff, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, write a book ripping the Trump people, you know, for the people that don't like Trump, you have a market. For James Comey, he is writing a book for the Comey family. Right. Maybe it'll go in his library. But nobody that likes Hillary Clinton will look at this book and say, now I feel better. In fact, I'm shocked that Stephen Colbert, who is more pro-Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton, would give him that type of reception. He's getting blitzed now by the Today Show. He got hit hard with another question from The View. He got hit hard by USA Today. Brett Baer is like a caged lion waiting in the wings.
Yeah, and the thing is, Greg Gutfeld made this point earlier today. It's like Comey's whole act is always to be tortured. He's already begun disavowing the book. He's saying, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have put the bit in about the president's hands. Perhaps that was a mistake. He's already doing to the book what he did with the Hillary investigation. You know, he closed the Hillary investigation, then he felt bad, so he reopened it, then he felt bad, so he closed it again, and now he's doing that to segments of his own book.
Saying that politics doesn't matter, but yet I looked at the polls and saw Hillary Clinton was going to win, so I said, okay, I'm going to go have this press conference announcing that Anthony Weiner's laptop contains top secret information. By the way, Greg Gutfeld, not a nice guy.
Yeah.
Please don't bring him up again, even though this is your segment and your show. But back to James Comey in particular.
You compared him to he compared you to the guy in the Stormy Daniels composite picture. And they're beginning to merge to me. It's like Comey Daniels, the porn star who only finds himself totally hot. They're a bizarre pairing in the news this week, and they both had their 15 minutes. Brian, you'll be in for Tucker later this week, the hardest working man in show business. We look forward to that.
I'll be there Friday.
Great. We'll see you then. A leader of the Women's March says the boycott of Starbucks must continue because the company's willing to work with a Jewish group. And it gets even more bizarre. That's coming up next. Plus, you know you want it? Goat yoga. Does it threaten the fabric of the American Republic? That's all coming up next on Tucker. Starbucks has been a proudly liberal corporation for years, but hasn't brought them an ounce of mercy now that the knives are out for them. The Women's March leader, Tamika Mallory, who's a pal of Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, says Starbucks' plan to shut down 8,000 stores for sensitivity training simply isn't enough. In fact, it's counterproductive because the company is enlisting the Anti-Defamation League to help, and Mallory says that the Jewish group, quote, is constantly attacking black and brown people. So the boycott of Starbucks must continue. Robert Patillo is an attorney, political strategist for the Rainbow Push Coalition. He joins us. Robert, as far as I understand the accusations here, one group of racists, Starbucks, has made the mistake of hiring another group of racists, the Anti-Defamation League, and they're being attacked by that by a third group of racists, the Louis Farrakhan supporters at the Women's March. All these groups are liberals. It looks like the Rainbow Coalition is actually a little more fractious than that in practice, Robert.
Well, one thing to clear up, that was my previous position at the Rainbow Push Coalition. I'm at the Patillo Law Group now in private practice. But on this point, I think what Ms. Mallory is pointing out is the fact that the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Goldblatt, is a former Starbucks executive. One of the other people involved in this training is Eric Holder, whose history and whose record is so deplorable on issues of police brutality and issues of bias against African Americans that the Black Lives Matter movement started while Eric Holder was the Attorney General. So it's a matter of not being PR and being an issue that actually affects real change.
So you're saying that Eric Holder, who was a black Attorney General under a black president, and Jonathan Greenblatt, the head honcho of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, who held some phony baloney diversity job as special advisor to President Obama, that these guys are too insensitive to do sensitivity training for Starbucks?
It's not about sensitivity. It's about making sure that you have policies in place that address issues of institutional bias and stereotypes. If you want to really address stereotypes and bias against individuals, have Sabrina Fulton, the mother of Trayvon Martin, who was killed because someone thought that he was robbing people just because he had a hoodie on. Have the mother of Tamir Rice, who was killed while he was playing with a gun in front of his house because someone thought that he was a criminal. That is what bias does to individuals. You have to have a real event and have a real training session.
Wait a minute. When you were doing Rainbow Push, the Reverend Jackson has done these kind of training sessions for corporations for years. You need people who can train them. Now, in this case, Starbucks, which is a famously liberal corporation, to the point where it was putting liberal messages on its coffee cups, an incident arose because they had two people in there who were in the store but didn't want to buy coffee, didn't want to buy one of their cardboard pastries, didn't want to buy one of their butterscotch pepperoni macchiatos or whatever the hell else they're selling in there. Is the argument that because of who they are, the identity group they belong to, they should have been allowed to remain in the store?
No, the issue is that every other person that's been in a Starbucks knows that people are there who are not actively buying things at that exact moment. And the fact that we stereotype groups and stereotype individuals as if they somehow don't have the same rights as other people. If that's the rule, enforce it across the board. If that's not the rule, enforce it across the board. But we can't have situations where individuals are picked out and targeted and then arrested because of their identity versus their being part of another ethnic group. That's the point that has to be pushed across, not some phony baloney idea that these people were just didn't want to buy something. They were there just like any other individuals, and if they had bought something later, if they bought something sooner, everyone has seen people doing this. Why just these individuals being picked out?
Wait a minute, Starbucks is shutting down its entire chain for this sensitivity training. The objection to the Anti-Defamation League is that they're constantly opposed, as Tamika Mallory says, to black and brown people. Is that actually true?
Well, the Anti-Defamation League has come out against various African-American organizations, be it the Nation of Islam under Minister Louis Farrakhan, be it the New Black Panther Party, be it other groups.
They're against Louis Farrakhan because he says things like, instead of going on about what Hitler did to the Jews should think to ask themselves what they did to make Hitler mad enough to be that opposed to them. That's what Farrakhan said, and that's why the Anti-Defamation League is opposed to Farrakhan. But here's my point. These are liberal groups. Why are they insufficiently liberal to hold? Because right-wing groups generally don't want to do sensitivity training. It's a liberal thing. If liberal groups can't even agree on their own sensitivity training, maybe there is no rainbow. Maybe we should all just go back to hating each other openly.
Well, it's not about liberal groups. It's not about sensitivity training. It's about the point of implicit bias against individuals that can have deadly effects for people who are simply arrested for no reason. Think about what happens if there weren't people there with cameras for these two individuals. They're arrested. They're charged with a crime. They're maybe charged with resisting arrest. They've spent thousands of dollars in legal fees. They can no longer apply for certain licenses. You ruin someone's life based upon an implicit bias that you hold. That's not sensitivity training. That's called just having regular human decency and addressing individual human rights. That's the point that needs to be put across.
We have to leave it there, Robert. Thanks for coming on the show. Tucker will be back after the break with part 2 of our series, Is College Worth It? Tonight, he tackles the impact of affirmative action on Americans. That's coming up next. Tucker's back now with part 2 of our series, Is College Worth It?
If education is the key to success in this country, and a degree from a brand name school is a virtual guarantee of future wealth and power, and we believe it is, then one of the most important questions we can ask about America is this: how exactly do you get into a prestigious university? What are the standards? Well, remarkably, nobody really knows the answer. College admissions is a bewildering mystery to most of us. It's a treasure map with the directions obscured. And that's not an accident. Colleges consistently refuse to explain how they admit students. Usually it takes legal action to find out. Secrecy is the key to their power, and they guard it jealously. But there are some facts available. Thanks to whistleblowers in college admissions offices and a series of civil rights lawsuits filed over the years, we do know something about admission standards. The main thing to understand going in is that no matter what you may have heard, higher education is not really a meritocracy. There aren't a lot of slow kids at Harvard, but that doesn't mean the smartest and hardest working applicants get in. Often they don't get in. Other factors come into play. The first and probably least publicized of these is legacy admissions. You're more likely to get into a prestigious school if your parents went there. Much more likely, it turns out. A 2011 study of 30 elite universities found that the children of undergraduate alumni were, on average, 45% more likely to get in. An earlier study found the legacy advantage was equivalent to an additional 160 points on the SAT. That's a major leg up. Colleges understand that admitting the kids of alumni help with fundraising. They don't like to talk about that, but it's true. The other factor that colleges don't like to talk about is affirmative action. The Supreme Court banned the use of racial quotas in admissions some years ago, but in real life, that decision meant nothing. Skin color remains a central consideration at every level of the process. The average admissions office is every bit as race conscious as any institution in the Jim Crow South, and far less transparent about it. The numbers tell the story. Every study, there have been a few of them, has shown a huge discrepancy between the achievement that colleges require of applicants of different racial groups. This is true at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. The new analysis of recent data from the Association of American Medical Colleges, for example, found that African-American students with low scores on the med school admissions test and average grades had a 56% chance of getting into med school. At the other end, Asian students with the exact same scores and grades had a 6% chance of getting in. So facts like these have spurred lawsuits from groups and individuals alleging discrimination, and in every case, the data they've unearthed prove there's been discrimination. Defenders of the current system, though, say that nobody is being discriminated against and that race has nothing to do with these numbers. Of course, no one actually believes that. Consider this example. At Caltech, which has a rare race-neutral admissions policy, the student body was 43% Asian in 2013. At Harvard, which erects quotas against Asians, as it once did against Jews, that number was 18%, roughly where it has been for years, even as the number of Asian applicants has risen. When skin color becomes a criterion for admission, some people lose. But who exactly wins? No one ever asked that. Now, we know who's supposed to benefit. Affirmative action was designed to level the playing field for Americans whose ancestors had been discriminated against. Primarily, this meant black applicants. Yet 50 years after affirmative action began, the percentage of African Americans at many elite colleges appears to be dropping, even as schools boast about being diverse. How is that happening? Simple. Foreigners are taking their place. Under the rules of race-conscious admissions, the son of a Nigerian tycoon meets the same standards and checks the same box as the son of a single mother from the south side of Chicago. Both are black, so for the purposes of diversity goals, they're exactly the same. But in fact, they're not the same at all. One is poor, American, and descended from people brought to this country by force. You'd probably want to help that kid. The other is a rich foreigner, well-connected, and far more likely to have attended a selective private school. He doesn't need your help. Yet who has a better chance of leveraging diversity standards to get into Harvard? You know the answer. The rich kid does. He gets an advantage he hasn't earned and doesn't deserve, and that's a win for him. Harvard wins, too. It gets to brag about being inclusive. Meanwhile, the kid on the south side of Chicago doesn't go to college at all. This is happening at schools all over this country, and the trend is accelerating as immigration accelerates. A 2007 study found that among black students at the top 28 American universities, the percentage of immigrants was about double the representation in the broader population. At Ivy League schools, students from immigrant families accounted for fully 41% of black freshmen. At Harvard, a study 3 years earlier found that 2/3 of all black undergraduates were from immigrant backgrounds. This is the opposite of what affirmative action was designed to do. Yet over time, the definition of who is eligible for affirmative action has expanded even further, moving even farther away from where it began. In many places, illegal aliens now qualify for lower admission standards. Universally identifying as Hispanic rather than white gives applicants the equivalent of 130 points on the SAT. So this is a huge advantage for newly arrived immigrants over native-born Americans. Yet it's puzzling if you think about it. Why should the descendant of Spanish conquistadors get preference over the great-grandchild of indentured Irish servants? What injustice is resolved by putting one over the other? How is that fair? How is it just? Well, of course, it isn't fair or just, which is why it is never explained or defended, only imposed. Americans lose in this arrangement. African Americans get shafted completely in favor of foreigners with no connection to this country or its history. Yet few complain about this because almost nobody really understands what is happening. And that's why the admissions process is secret, so you won't challenge it. Catherine Lehman is chairwoman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She spoke with us about all of this just a minute ago. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So what's the purpose of affirmative action? Why do we have it?
Well, the goal is to make sure that our colleges and universities have a chance to achieve the diversity that they say that they want for their schools, where the long-standing precedent is that they can use affirmative action if there are no other means to achieve that diversity and to be able to satisfy their educational mission.
So it's not an attempt to redress past wrongs. It's simply for the sake of variety.
Well, it started as an attempt to address past wrongs. I think that goal continues to exist, but the reality is that schools have, of long standing, said that what they want to do is to educate students to live in, work in, be prepared for an increasingly global society, and to be able to be full participants in the world that they will enter. And so achieving diversity is one way of making sure that students are able to be educated toward that end.
So if you factor sports out of it, and this has been done, and you reduce it to grades and test scores, it still remains true that Asians, East Asians, Chinese particularly, and Koreans, score like 500 points higher than other groups with the same admissions rates. And so
here's a flaw in your analysis.
Yes.
You're reducing it to the test scores and the grades, which the court has said specifically you cannot do. The schools, the colleges and universities have a First Amendment academic freedom interest in selecting whom they want to educate and how they want to educate them. And what they say is
I'm not contesting the right. I'm just saying it's prima facie discrimination. And if it were happening to any other group, of course, there'd be a total outrage.
Well, I think it would be a total outrage if it were discrimination, period. What the court has said is that that's not how to analyze it, and that's not discrimination. The court has said you take a look at whether the school is analyzing all of who a child is.
No, I'm aware of what the court says. I don't think it passes the common sense test. But let me ask you this. Do you think, if you conceded that part of the purpose of affirmative action, and I think the purpose that most Americans would identify with, if there's any part of it that they would, is the idea that there are groups in America, particularly African Americans, who are discriminated against historically, and this is a way of making good on that, or trying. So how does it make you feel when you see the numbers that foreign-born black students displace African-American students, especially prestigious schools, at a really high rate? And then the school gets to say we're diverse when they're letting in, the kid of the Nigerian ambassador. Doesn't that seem a perversion of the purpose?
Well, I think it might be a perversion of the purpose. I haven't seen those numbers, and that's not my experience from investigating the schools. And in fact, what we're seeing now, in particular in this administration with its hostility to having people come to this country from other countries, we're seeing a drop-off in international students at our schools in a way that is affecting the bottom line.
But let's say, I'll get the exact numbers in a second, but let's say, I don't know, 19% of all black people in the United States were foreign-born, but the percentage of black students at prestigious schools who were foreign-born was like 45%. That would suggest that they're disproportionately getting the slots that most of us think are going to African Americans. You don't think that's a problem?
Well, I again need to resist your reduction of the applicant to a particular characteristic rather than looking at the whole person.
Well, the schools, of course, reduce them to that. I mean, they're totally race conscious in the way that they do admissions.
Let me tell you that is just not true. That the schools are pretty opaque in the way that they do their admissions, and that's a problem for the American public. But I've overseen investigations in colleges and universities on exactly this topic, and what I've seen time and time and time again is that the schools actually do a very good job of taking a look at what the students say about themselves, what their recommenders say.
Okay, then my last question, we're almost out of time, is why can't we judge that for ourselves? Since this is the gateway to wealth and power in this country, a degree from a prestigious school, and the government subsidies are overwhelming, and the tax breaks are overwhelming, why don't I have a right to know what the criteria are that they're using?
Tucker, I'm a huge believer in transparency. I think it would be better for the American public to have more information about that. When I was at the Office for Civil Rights, we entered into a resolution agreement with Princeton on this topic, and we evaluated exactly this question, and we made our analysis very public to be able to share what people's questions were and what our analysis was.
Well, good. Well, I'm totally with you on that. I think knowing more is better. Kevin, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
That's part 2 of his College Worth It. Here's a college that isn't worth it. A professor in California says she's happy Barbara Bush is dead, and she's bragging she can't be fired for saying it. Also, goat yoga is taking over America, but could it be a threat to our national well-being? We'll ruminate on ruminants when we return.
Your legs, plant your feet, stand up nice, elbow to knee as you.
A professor in California says Barbara Bush was a, quote, amazing racist, and she's boasting she can't be fired for it. Trace Gallagher has more. Trace.
Mark, Professor Rana Jarrar is a Palestinian American who for years has been accused of making racist statements against white women. 1 hour after Barbara Bush died, Jarrar tweeted, quoting, "Barbara Bush was a generous and smart and amazing racist who, along with her husband, raised a war criminal. F out of here with your nice words." Jarrar added, quoting, "Either you are against these pieces of blank in their genocidal ways, or you're part of the problem. That's actually how simple this is. I'm happy the witch is dead." Then after the professor was attacked on social media, she wrote, quote, "All the hate I'm getting almost made me forget how happy I am that George W. Bush is probably really sad right now. And despite saying she cannot be fired because of tenure, Fresno State says that she can be." The college also apologized to the Bush family, but a Fresno State alum says Jarrar is getting vitriol usually directed at women of color.
Thanks for that, Trace. An interesting angle on the passing of Mrs. Bush. A strange new fad is sweeping the nation. Goat yoga, which is exactly what it sounds like. Lotus poses and domesticated goats. But is it good for America or America's goats? A planned session. Oh, look at that. What a cutie. Here's looking at you, kid. A planned session in New York was just cancelled because it didn't have the right health permits. Ashley Bird is a spokeswoman for PETA New York. Ashley, I know PETA's always concerned when animals are involved. The goats seem to enjoy this, or at least the baby goats do. What are the issues here?
Well, there is nothing inherently wrong with doing the downward dog pose next to a goat. You know, this obviously it looks like an event that's intended to just be harmless fun. But like anything involving animals, in the wrong hands, it can turn into an abusive situation. Recently in Australia, a petting zoo that was renting goats for goat yoga, the owner was slapped with 10 counts of charges of cruelty to animals because the goats were found to be malnourished, dehydrated, and sick.
Isn't that necessary, though, if you just want baby goats, rather big, fat, beefy goats? They weigh some, and you don't want them walking around on your back necessarily.
Well, that's a great question. You know, the best thing people can do if they want to participate in an activity like goat yoga is do it at a place like a sanctuary where you know that the goats are being treated well, they're living a good life, and that the sanctuary is committed to ensuring their well-being. If there are babies there, you know, they didn't get there because they were purchased someplace, you know, sketchy. I mean, it's a good situation for the animals, and you can go have fun.
Oh, thanks for that advice, Ashley. I like goats. The Saudi Arabian most beautiful goat competition. They look even more beautiful when they're walking around with you. Thank you for that, Ashley. We'll close it out in just a moment. Goat yoga. We deal with all the important issues. You know it makes sense.